and dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News here on UCY.tv. We have a few articles I will be going over in the second half. One thing though, I really want to, 4th of July, celebrating, the founding of the country, we have to appreciate what the founding fathers were doing, because they were doing something truly revolutionary. But we definitely need to improve on that whole ideology of freedom, liberty. And I think that a lot of people are really searching for that and are really getting into the deep ideology behind that. And that there is times that we step back and see all the bad, and it gets hard not to do that when you see people say that we need to get back to a limited government and keep a government. They still legitimize government, and it's we need to evolutionize beyond that, and that doesn't mean we can't celebrate that revolutionary act that our founding fathers took. But we still have to think beyond that. But you do get disappointed. Sometimes I'm so disappointed with my country, I feel that maybe I forget that the world plays a part in this, because it's hard for a small portion of the world to continue to have any freedom if the rest of the world is being, governed by authoritarians. And we have to really go, well, we will have the vacuum effect if we can't get others around the world to search for freedom. You can't force it upon them, but even something like this broadcast is one way to reach out, and social media. And I hope to see more people start their own website and do their own broadcasts. And we're going to need that for the future. They're definitely trying to put a lockdown on that. I do have a clip. It's going to take up a little bit of the first hour, but it's from Stefan Molyneux, Disappointment with the World. And, again, we focus on the United States, but we have to realize that we will create a vacuum if we don't try to spread the message and allow people to take back their own local areas and, make that a bastion of freedom. And we have to do that here locally, but we also have to get people around the world to do that in their local areas. And we have to do this before they do create a one world order that is so apparent. A lot of people will argue we already have it, which we do to a point, but we are still on the air. We are still broadcasting. We are still telling, our opinions, and we haven't been shut up yet. We still have a chance, and we need to take it and continue to spread it. And that's why we need more people doing broadcasts, more websites out there. We need to continue with that info war. You have to be, a warrior to break the propaganda that's put out by governments. But onto this clip here, and I'll cue it up here, and we'll get to it.
So a good friend of mine asked me to do a show on disappointment with the world. It's a fine, fine topic. Those of us who have even a few shreds of ideals clinging to the talons with which we claw through the tunnel of culture to the future have good reason, good cause to be disappointed with the world. And there are important reasons why this disappointment occurs. In understanding these reasons is essential to really changing the future. So, I'm going to tell you a secret. Big Stiff Butt has a secret. Ooh, yes, I do. I have a secret, and it is about the most tragic of the secrets of the world. It is one of the most closely guarded, heavily defended, well-fortified, surrounded by the moats of self-congratulation, pompous delusion, and moral self-righteousness. Let me tell you the secret of the world. Why the world is the way it is. Why the world is so resistant to changing to anything remotely approaching reason and evidence, particularly in the realm of ethics. Let me tell you the secret. Lean in, lean forward, lean closer. This secret can only be whispered. No one has any principles. Did you catch that? Let me say it again. No one has any principles. Do you understand? Let's unpack the greatest secret of the world together. I would say it shall be an enticing and enlightening journey. And it's one of these moments where, I don't know, like when I was, 42, 43 or whatever, I needed some weak reading glasses, just generally, I never needed any glasses. And things were getting a tad blurry, and I thought, I'm just tired. Whatever, right? So I went to the optometrist, and I don't know if you've ever gone, but you look through these little portholes. It looks like a submarine periscope. And they click things, and you're like, yeah, I think I can read that. And then click, boing, the letters jump out at you, and everything becomes clear. Well, this is one of these click, boing moments, a CB moment, where the world will become shockingly clear very quickly. Nobody has any principle. Oh, shoot, forgot to whisper it. Nobody has any principles. John Jacob Jingleheimer-Schmidt. And this is really important to understand. Now, when I say nobody has any principles, I don't mean nobody is nice. There are very nice people in the world. People who will help you change a tire, people who will mow your lawn if you're sick. Lots of people will do, people who will bring you food if you're under the weather. There are lots of nice people in the world. But not because they're principled, but because they were raised in that kind of way. Right? Nobody says, well, I chose to speak English out of my principles. It was a principled decision. I surveyed all the languages shortly after I was born, and I thought, you know what? That African clicking language, or Urdu, or ancient Gaelic, not so much of value to me. So I think I will choose English. Seems to be the international language of commerce, and it was a principled decision for me to learn English. No, of course not. It wasn't a principled decision. It was just where you happen to be born. And if you happen to be born into a family which is nice, then you will very likely grow up being quite nice. If you grow up in a family that is quite cruel, you will likely grow up being quite cruel. So, but these are not principled decisions. These are just the footprint of history on the forehead of the tender mind. There are lots of nice people in the world, but they're not nice because they're principled. They're nice because that's just the language they were taught. Nobody surveys religion and says, I'm going to choose Zoroastrianism or Jainism or Protestantism or whatever. I mean, these are not principled decisions. These are merely exposure effects to whatever environment you happen to grow up in. So when I say that people are unprincipled, I don't mean that they're unscrupulous and predatory and all that. No, not at all. When I say people are unprincipled, I mean that they have no principles. And once you understand this, the world will jump into a very clear focus very quickly. And a lot of the confusion that you have about your relationships will become very clear. So let me give you an example of what I mean. And if you've had any conversations with people about real freedom, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So people will say stuff like, society has an obligation to help the poor. And they say this because, well, they're nice, right? It's a nice thing to say. Helping the poor is a nice thing to do. It's a nice thing to say. Now, when you then point out to these fine people that coercion is immoral, violence is immoral, and the methodology by which the poor are supposedly helped in the modern world is through the coercive power of taxation and redistribution, with the majority of the money going to middle-class and upper-middle-class bureaucrats and a small amount of it dribbling down just enough to keep the poor dependent upon the welfare state and buy votes from here to eternity. Even if you don't go into the latter analysis, which I think is perfectly valid, they will say society has an obligation to help the poor, because it's a nice thing to say, it's a nice sentiment. And then you say, well, should we use violence to do that? Well, no. But the system that you approve of at the moment, or at least our current system, uses the violence of taxation, the theft of debt, and the regressive taxation of the inflation of the money supply in order to, quote, help the poor. Now, if they have principles, they will at least stumble. They will stall. They will slow down. When anybody with any integrity is hit with a contradiction, they stumble. Right? Those who smoothly glide over contradictions are generally insane and usually on the dark side of the good and evil divide. But people who are hit with contradictions, who stutter, who stall, who, even if they sort of willfully override those contradictions, people who are hit with contradictions, who have no problem with those contradictions, well, those are some pretty scary people, right? And the people who stall and stutter with contradictions are the people who have at least a vague principle called non-contradiction. And one of the three basic laws of logic, right? So, in my 3 decades worth of debating with people, and you can see this in any of the number of debates, dozens of debates I've had with people over the years, in this conversation, people are not surprised by, are not troubled by, do not stall or stutter or change their mind or admit fault when they are provided information or arguments contrary to their facts or logic. Jake DiLiberto, I pointed out, I pointed out that the CIA, despite billions of dollars worth of funding, had no idea about 9/11 and did not at all predict the fall of the Soviet Empire, had no idea it was going to occur. So what fucking use are they? And he said, no, they did predict this, and then I found a bunch of articles and read one of them out on the show saying that they didn't change his opinion, didn't stall him, didn't slow him down. Tom Willicott, a lawyer who I debated about free societies with, he said that insurance companies regularly deny claims. I pointed out that Medicare has a far higher rate of denying claims. It's 1% to 2% for private insurance companies and 6% or 7% for Medicare, Medicaid. And this didn't change his argument or position about the virtue of the state at all. It doesn't matter, right? This is what I mean when we say people have no principles. They have no principles with which to guide their actions. And once you understand that, then you will understand that just about everyone is lying to themselves almost all the time. And when you understand that, then it's easier to not be as disappointed in the world. The world is anti-philosophical. Please understand this. The world is anti-philosophical. And as a result of that, the world is careening around from reaction to bullying, to special interest groups, to media attacks, to syrupy, self-congratulatory, sentimental worship of generally the inconsequential. But the world is careening around like a pinball bumping off the bouncers in a tabletop game. You ever played air hockey, that little disc? It flies around when you hit it. Well, people are the little disc. They bounce around. There are principles to not having principles, right? And the world follows the principles called, here's what happens when you don't have principles. And if you understand that, then the world makes a lot more sense. So people don't have any principles, and yet, admitting that they have no principles is absolutely unbearable for them. Right? These are the two facts that you need to understand about the world so that it makes sense to you. It makes sense at all. A, people have no principles. B, they will never admit that they have no principles. The human desire for positive self-regard is one of the most fundamental addictions of a broken species. When you have no principles, then you elevate the circumstances of your history and the personality that it produced, the whim of the moment, the desire to gain approval from dangerous people, and the desire to screw people who are harmless to you for the sake of appeasing the brutal people. I mean, this is all that people do. They walk into any situation and they immediately assess who is the most powerful, who is the most dangerous, who is the least powerful, who is the least dangerous. They align themselves with the most powerful and they screw the helpless. I mean, just look at the media and its relationship to, say, public sector unions or the poor or whatever. The media side with whoever has the most power, those in government, and they screw the poor, those who have no power. Or the only reason that they will ever elevate a group that is fundamentally powerless or currently powerless to any kind of elevated station is because they want something from that group, right? So the Democrats are currently trying to get amnesty for illegal immigrants or people who've moved without the permission of sociopaths. And, of course, the only reason that they're doing that is that they know that they will get votes. The Hispanic community is very pro-state. And so they're trying to enfranchise a voting bloc that will vote Democrat. It's not because they care about illegal immigrants. It's because they want their votes, right? Democrats generally can't win with whites, right? And they can't win with native-born Americans, so they have to... Oh, they can't win with free whites, right? So generally tend to go for public sector unions and minorities and so on, right? So there are no principles involved in this whatsoever. And, I mean, I'm not sure that the libertarian community is exactly immune from this problem. It's taken years and struggles to get libertarians to even begin thinking about whether, say, spanking violates the non-aggression principle, which should be number one on the list of things to look at as a community. I mean, because these are things we can actually do, right? Spanking is not self-defense violation. It's a violation of the non-aggression principle, and it is the most prevalent violence in society. 90% of parents hitting their children. It is the most prevalent violence in society. And as I've argued for years, there are massive effects on the future, on the future development of personality and so on. Negative effects from spanking, which I've also argued for years and had experts on the show to discuss. So one of the most destructive and certainly the most prevalent form of violence in society should be the first concern of any group interested in reducing the amount of violence in society, because you can't change foreign aid or the Federal Reserve policy or anything like that. But no, they would like to waste their time mucking about with politics rather than focus on reducing the most prevalent form of violence in the world, which is the hitting of children, which you can actually convince people to stop, and which, of course, is going to allow a generation to be raised without trauma, or at least with less trauma, and to be raised more peaceful, with more of a capacity to process rational arguments, less defensive, less avoidant, smarter by 3 to 5 IQ points, and certainly you need to be a little smarter than your average bear to process, say, Austrian economic arguments for the efficiency and virtue of the free market. So, you know, if you were a space alien coming down with no knowledge of the world, and, you know, of course, you're only going to become a space alien who travels to other worlds if that's a free market. In other words, if children are treated well, not raised in coercive situations, and thus become used to coercive solutions to problems, i.e. the state, you touch down and say, well, who's the group who's most interested in the non-aggression principle? Oh, those would be libertarians. Muckalaka duck. Well, what is the most prevalent violence in the world? Hitting children, muckalaka duck. Well, the group that is most interested in the non-aggression principle must certainly be opposed to the most prevalent violence in society, and that violence which makes almost all other violence possible. No, they don't talk about it, muckalaka duck. Why? Because they have no principles. Because people as a whole have no principles. If you were truly interested in opposing and ending, not just opposing violence in some self-congratulatory audit the Fed kind of bullshit way, but if you were actually focused on reducing violence in society, you would look for the most prevalent violence in society that was under people's greatest control. Hitting children. Easy peasy, nice and easy. That's what you should be focusing on. And if the most prevalent violence that is the most under the control of the individual is never touched on in libertarian circles, then you know that it's not to do with actually promoting the non-aggression principle in effective ways that people can act upon. But it's about something else, which we can talk about another time. And this is not to bag on libertarians. Love libertarians, for the most part. Atlas Shrugged, pound for pound, the biggest paperweight to hold down the state you could imagine, never ever talks about how to raise children. Never ever talks about spanking. Because what's really important in terms of the portrayal of an elimination of violence in society is Dr. Robert Stadler's death ray and some imaginary device that converts the static in air into power. You see, that's where you've really got to focus on things, not the everyday. As in science fiction, death rays from above, that's what you focus on, not the most prevalent violence in the world. What percentage of people rape, assault adults, murder, steal? Very few. Certainly in sort of libertarian circles and in the circles in which libertarians talk, very few. Couple of points, maybe. But 90% of parents will hit their children. It's the most universal, consistent, destructive violation of the non-aggression principle. And those who are most dedicated to expanding the non-aggression principle speak of it not. Right? Which means it's about something else other than a rational analysis of where we should best put our efforts as a community. The most prevalent, the most under people's control. It's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. But people don't have principles. I've not been reading Reason.com off and on for years. Never see them mention parenting. Never see them mention spanking. I mean, you can read the most obtuse articles about Lord knows what. Should nannies be certified by the nanny state? Gosh, you wouldn't believe how free market principles have improved San Francisco's streetcar industry. Look at all the cool stuff that's happening in Detroit. There are buses with Wi-Fi on them that you text them to come and get you. Yeah, that's the important stuff. That's the important stuff. Well, it's a fun read, but it's got nothing to do. So, again, this is not, I'm just sort of pointing this out. That there's no principles. People don't start, I don't know if they're just sort of going on prior momentum, but again, I'm used to entrepreneurial stuff where you consistently wipe the blackboard clean. The whiteboard, I guess, these days. You consistently wipe the whiteboard clean and start as if you knew nothing. That's essential. Because the market is always changing, and yesterday's assumptions are today's bear traps. So I'm just used to wiping things off with a blank slate and starting from scratch. That was my decade-and-a-half-long career as an entrepreneur. And so for me, when I sort of became interested in actually really promoting freedom, then it wasn't that hard. Okay, well, I'm really into the non-aggression principle. What's the most prevalent violence in society? Easy. Spanking. Is spanking a violation of the non-aggression principle? Well, not that hard to argue. I've got an article out there that argues for it. What is the violence that is under people's control the most? In other words, if I'm going to spend my precious life, energy, and treasure and days promoting the non-aggression principle, I want to do it in a way that people can act upon. Right? Otherwise, I'm writing a book of what elves should eat to lose weight, or how to become a buff leprechaun. It may be full of principles, but they're meaningless and abstract and nonsensical, fantastical and impossible. So, what's the most prevalent violence? What's the most violence that's under most people's control? It would be the most prevalent, right? Obviously. And that's what you focus on. Or at least that's a big part of what you focus on. So, not that hard, but again, if you have a principle called promoting the non-aggression principle, you'd look for the most prevalent violence, the one that's under the most people's control, and you'd focus on that. Easy peasy, nice and easy, lots of simplicity in that pie. But people don't have principles. Right? They do what moves them, they do what appeals to them, they do what motivates them at an emotional level, usually without ever asking why it motivates them. And they call that virtue. They call that virtue. And they call that a principle. I believe in the non-aggression principle, so you must promote anti-spanking. What? What would that have to do with anything? Right? I mean, it's funny because it's so sad. It's so sad. And it's so predictable. People literally get shocked and appalled at my focus on the most prevalent violence that is under the most people's greatest control. They can't, for the life of them, understand why on earth I would focus my efforts on actually helping people to reduce the most prevalent violence that is under their greatest control. They can't possibly imagine it. Are there lots of libertarian articles on things like circumcision? Well, is circumcision a violation of the non-aggression principle? Of course it is. It's not self-defense and it's healthy tissue that is being removed. And people are like, why on earth would somebody interested in promoting the non-aggression principle, why would that person make a video about circumcision? It makes no sense. Other than the fact that it's one of the most common violences done against babies. It's the most common violence done against babies in the world. Every 47 seconds, another boy is genitally mutilated for life. Is it under people's control? Of course it is. Of course it is. Is it incredibly prevalent? Of course it is. Millions of little boys are genitally mutilated every year. Can it be controlled? Can it be reduced? Of course it can. Will it have an enormous positive effect on the world as a whole? Of course it will. Is it an intelligent and principled application of energies towards reducing violations of the non-aggression principle? Of course it is. But because people have no principles, they just view it as weird. I mean, come on. Come on. Is it a violation? Just ask yourself about what I talk about. Is it a violation of the non-aggression principle? Well, yeah. Is it prevalent? Well, yeah. Is it under people's control? Well, yeah. We must have voluntarism to improve the post office, to improve state services of various kinds. Because when you are in an enforced or coercive or involuntary relationship, then there is a loss of quality and a generation of inefficiency. And then I say, well, we need to privatize the family and remind people that adult relationships are voluntary. People are like, what are you talking about? But there's no way to improve the quality of parenting without making adult child and parent relationships, without reminding people of the basic reality and the legal fact and the philosophical fact and the moral fact that it's completely voluntary. You don't have to see abusive parents if you can't repair the relationship. And people are like, well, what on earth would that conceivably have to do with libertarianism? And yet if a woman is being beaten by her husband and she leaves the relationship, well, she is promoting and living by the non-aggression principle. Thou shalt not aggress against me. Thou shalt not use violence against me. Removing yourself from a violent situation is entirely in line with libertarian principles. I mean, if you are drafted into an unjust war and then you claim conscientious objector status because you do not want to be in a violent situation to commit or to receive violence, would libertarians say, well, that's incomprehensible. What on earth would that have to do with libertarian principles? Of course not. They would say, what a hero. You know, he's disengaging himself from a violent situation and therefore he's reducing the prevalence of violence in the world. And a woman who leaves an abusive husband, well, yeah, he's initiating the use of force against her. She is removing herself from that situation. And therefore, that's a reduction in the prevalence of violence in the world. Yay! What you say to adults who may want to disengage from brutal or abusive parents? Well, suddenly this has nothing to do with anything. How could this have anything to do with libertarianism? And of course, which is to say that the effects of violence should not be consequential to people, right? If you aggress against a child, if you abuse or neglect a child for 20 years, and then the child just has to see you anyway, well, what libertarians are saying is that we should get rid of any negative consequences for violence. And so there should never be any laws or sanctions against it, and a woman who's raped must still date her rapist. And if she chooses not to, that's terrible. Well, come on. If you're abused by parents for 20 years, and you can't reform the relationship, they won't go into therapy with you, they can't, right? Then of course, you should be free to leave if you choose. And I would actually argue that staying would be pretty destructive to your mental health, to your happiness. And it breaks the cycle of violence, because parents who are abusive will probably also be abusive to grandchildren. And yet, when I put these principles forward, you can see libertarians' heads doing this slow rotation, like they're coming from the TV. Actionable arguments relative to diminishing violations of the non-aggression principle are coming from the TV. The call is coming from inside the house. Oh my God, stuff we could actually do, stuff that's confrontational, stuff that's actionable. Because people don't have principles, right? Libertarians are to spanking as the general population is to the argument that taxation is force. But with much less excuse, because libertarians promote the non-aggression principle at all times. But you bring anti-spanking of the voluntary family to libertarians, and they react exactly the same way as bringing the argument that taxation is force to your average person in the general population. Because people don't have any principles, right? They're localized structures, but they're not principles. They don't have the principles, right? Now, somebody who has real principles, and it's not like, when I say nobody has principles, I mean, we understand a few people who do, but when you bring an argument to someone that is valid but shocking, then we hope that when we say taxation is forced to people, they'll go, oh my goodness, I'd never really thought of it that way. And then we'll have some arguments, but it's so obvious that taxation is forced that they'll go, wow, I'd never thought about it that way, but you know what? You make a very compelling point. I always hate compelling because it sounds like it's something you sell or whatever. Your argument has nice tits. But you'd hope that they'd say, well, and they think about it and come back and say, well, what about this? And, and eventually, hopefully within a week or a month or so, they're like, wow, that really is something. I can't disagree with it, and therefore I'm going to have to change my opinion and perspective on a whole bunch of things. And given how we've all faced when we make the argument taxation is theft, or whatever, typical libertarian arguments, when we make this argument to people, we're very disappointed when they ignore it or avoid it or pretend it doesn't exist or whatever, right? Or mock us or attack us or downgrade us or insult us or slander us or whatever, right? Well, it's pretty terrible. But then when the libertarian community gets something that's shocking to them, like anti-spanking messages and so on, they do pull exactly the same stuff. Pull exactly the same stuff. Don't ask about the principles, don't ask about the arguments, don't ask about the reasoning, don't ask for the evidence, don't ask for the data. Just avoid, attack, pretend like it doesn't exist. And this is not to be overly critical. I think that the libertarian community has more integrity than most communities. But nonetheless, it is generally, it's slow to change, right? But generally, after 6 or 7 years, it generally is slow to change, starting to change a little. But thanks, Jeff. But it's just an example of how principles don't apply. They say spanking is a violation of the non-aggression principle. Here are the arguments. Spanking is something that we can convince people to stop and to change. Spanking is going to have a huge effect on how the world goes in the future. Then we should all drop politics and focus on anti-spanking, right? Well, circumcision rewires the baby and the baby's nerves and pain centers and future responses to pain and so on. And if you have a heightened response to pain, it's hard to process emotional trauma. If it's hard to process emotional trauma, it's hard to reason, as I've argued in fdrurl.com/BIB. But people will proclaim principles, right? Which is why it's so confusing to recognize the reality that people don't have principles. People don't have principles. They don't have philosophy. Philosophy is the thing that allows you to wipe the whiteboard clean, right? That's what philosophy does. Let's pretend we know nothing. How should we best spend our energies to achieve the moral goals that we want? I mean, it's a question I ask myself, like, literally every single day. Okay, I've got X amount of hours. How can I spend my time to most valuably promote the principles that I have proven and accept? Regardless of any other considerations, regardless of social approval, regardless of historical momentum, regardless of accepted wisdom, regardless of popular topics, regardless of attack, regardless of calumny, regardless of insult, slander, hate sites, you name it, doesn't matter. Because to have philosophy is to have principles. And everyone you go to, and you say, what is the good? And they'll give you answers. You can say, why is it good? Anybody who can't answer that question has no principles. If you don't know why something is good, then all you're doing is going on emotional preference, historical inertia, cultural bias, social approval, you name it. It's nothing to do with principles. If you cannot explain your beliefs from first principles, then you have no principles. You just plant a flag and say, here's where I live. And the flag is planted where you happen to live already, where your skills and preferences and social approvals are, and that is what you do. So the number of people who can argue from first principles from a blank whiteboard as to why they believe what they believe, particularly in the realm of virtue, is a tiny handful at best. So they have no principles. And you have no principles, therefore you cannot organize things according to any rational or empirical basis. And therefore you must rely on approval, fear, desire, whim of the moment, culture, religion. I mean, but none of those things have any particular principles. They may have commandments, they may have absolutes, but those absolutes hang in a void. Gravity is an absolute, but it's a whole lot different from having a theory of gravity that you can explain from first principles, or at least describe the effects of from first principles or from basic math, right? I mean, the apple fell on Newton, fell on a whole bunch of other people, but Newton was the one who figured out the principles. Before that, people could catch balls, for sure. And they could sail, and they could build houses, but they had no principles, because they didn't understand the math or the calculus of gravity. And so, rather than experience the discomfort of realizing, recognizing, and admitting that you do not know why you believe what you believe, rather than that, people say, who I am and what I do and what I think is virtuous. And they sink like a hippo into mud their entire sense of self-efficacy, self-esteem, self-congratulatory moral pomposity. Their entire identity is sunk into those assumptions. The coincidental is the absolute. The circumstantial is the rational. It's like somebody living near a sports team. My sports team is the best. And these are the ones that I must support, or these are the ones I must win. That must win. Well, I was born into a nice family, so being nice and helpful and all of that is the best. But the moment somebody brings a principle around niceness and so on to me, I have to, right, the moment it becomes a principle, well, nice can't involve the initiation of force. Taxation is the initiation of force. Spanking is the initiation of force. Circumcision is the initiation of force. Therefore, you must oppose all of these things, because they sure ain't nice. Right? No principles. There is only the sinking of a false identity into the perspective that that which comes naturally to me is the good. And this happens not just with people who are nice, but with people who are mean, right? In a conversation 2 Sunday shows ago with a guy, Wednesday show, the first Wednesday show with a guy, dominance is naturally human nature. Everybody wants to dominate. Well, that's him, right? But he makes it a principle because that's what comes naturally to him. It makes it a principle. Of course he does. Otherwise, he must work philosophically, as opposed to all the ex post facto justifications that people claim are philosophical, which are not. They're not philosophical. So, if you listen to what people say rather than observe what they do and observe their reactions to philosophy, if you only listen to if you only listen to what people say, you will perpetually be disappointed. Right? Like 80% of people on dating sites lie, and the other 20%, I guess, lie more subtly. And so if you only judge people by their most flattering portrait from 10 years ago before they gained weight, then you're going to be disappointed when you meet them. If you view the narcissistic portrayal of personal vanity as truth, then you will forever be disappointed in the reality of how people act, right? And, people obviously say, well, I want to be a good friend, and I want to do the right thing, and I love to be there to support people who are in need, and this and that and the other. This is not a principle. It doesn't mean they won't do it, and maybe they will. But they won't do it because they say they do it. Everyone's like, oh yeah, we should treat children well, and children of the future, and so on. But that's not how they live. They live by selling off children to appease special interest groups in the here and now, jamming them in shitty schools, hit them, circumcise them, brutalize them, indoctrinate them with various belief systems and superstitions. Just look at how people live. And if you look at how people live and what they actually do, and you recognize that they don't have any principles, all they have is who I am and where I live and what I do is the good. And therefore, if I don't do something, it must be the good, right? So I want to support people. Oh, I didn't support this person. Well, I thought they were fine, or they didn't ask in the right way, or I didn't know, or I did offer vaguely some support at some level at some point, and they never took me up on it. Like that then becomes the good, right? I think we should help the poor, and I don't think we should use violence to get what we want. Well, the way that you propose helping the poor at the moment through the welfare state involves the use of violence. Well, it's not really violence. We vote for it, and certainly the poor would be much greater harmed if we had what you call a free society, which is not freedom for body. Just redefine. That which I want, that which I'm partial to, that which gains me social approval and avoids social attack, is just the good. It's not principles. This is just it's like a cork on the ocean saying, "Hey, I think I'll go this way," like it's some decision, and just reacting and bouncing off the whims of the moment. Right? Like your male friends may be there for you and may be fun till they get a girlfriend, and then what happens? Well, they change. They then go and pursue that, and screws to you, right? Your parents may say, don't hit, and then you point out that they hit you throughout the childhood. Or your parents may say, don't take other people's stuff away. Don't take other people's property, and then you may point out that they regularly took your property away to punish you, and so on. They may say, don't hold down your brother and sit on him because he can't move then, and then they may confine you in a timeout. I mean, you point out these contradictions, and they'll just will it and wish it away. They may say, you have to be prepared for your test, and then you point out to your parents that they weren't prepared for being parents, and they just wish it away. Right? No principles. Once you understand no principles, and admitting that there are no principles is unbearable, you understand why philosophy is so hard to spread. You understand why people act so inconsistently relative to their virtues. You will understand all of this. Everything will become clear, and you will grieve for everything that is missing in the world, but you will not be continually disappointed by its absence, because you will know why it's absent.
And that was Stefan Molyneux on YouTube. The hypocrisy is really where you get down to the fundamentals and character. I think those two things play a major role in a society. If a society is to be free, like he said, you have to have principles with the character, and you really gotta check your own hypocrisy. We all have it, and we'll continue to have it because we're going to continue to learn and evolutionize, and those are things that we have to address, and that can feed into the foreign policy and the United States and policing the world. We have to really start to address all of it in our own personal lives. So, this doesn't mean that, when I address the problems with being, me personally being, I can't and no longer look at myself as a constitutionalist. I've kind of moved past that because I believe for the time it was revolutionary, and I just don't quite see it. But there was this article out of Ben Swan, says on July 4th, remember the Sons of Liberty. On this July 4th holiday, I hope that you will take a moment to truly consider the sacrifices made by so many generations of Americans that have made us free. I would like to share with you an idea from our nation's birth that may have been forgotten by many. No doubt you have heard of a group that paved the way to the American Revolution, known as the Sons of Liberty. What you may not know is that this group, get off my screen here, okay, of patriots started small as a group of agitators known as the Loyal Nine. That name came from the fact that this group consisted of 9 men committed to agitation of the Stamp Act. And excuse my talking, I did have a few teeth popped out of the back there last week and a little swelling, so that's going down. Wisdom teeth are a pain in the butt, and they were definitely ready to be pulled. But back to this article here. 11 years before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, I don't know if I read that, the Loyal Nine began in the summer of 1765, 11 years before the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Within 1 year, their number would grow to over 2,000 men, known as the Sons of Liberty. Possibly, they are best remembered for their role in the Boston Tea Party and in the tarring and feathering of stamp act collectors or stamp tax collectors. The true role of the Sons of Liberty, however, was most influential not only in those dramatic acts of defiance against British tyranny, but in their role in media. Yes, in media. If you are unfamiliar with the Stamp Act, it was a direct tax by the British Parliament, specifically on the colonies of British America. The Stamp Act required that many printed materials in the colonies be produced on stamped paper produced in London, carrying an embossed revenue stamp. These printed materials include legal documents, magazines, newspapers, and many other types of paper used throughout the colonies. Like previous taxes, the stamp tax had to be paid in valid British currency, not in colonial paper money. The great many of the Sons of Liberty were printers and publishers themselves, and even those who were not were sympathetic to the cause. It was they who would pay the most as a result of the Stamp Act. Nearly every newspaper in the colonies carried daily reports of the activities of the Sons. Accounts of the most dramatic escapades spread throughout the colonies. In one most remarkable incident, an account of the Virginia Stamp Act resolutions was printed far and wide. The ultimate effect of such reporting was to embolden both citizens and legislators in every colony. The Stamp Act became effective November 1st, 1765. Nearly all these papers went right on publishing without the required stamp. One of the direct goals of the Stamp Act was to crack down on free speech by these colonial newspapers. Why was the work of the Sons of Liberty so important to the coming revolution? Because the newspaper printers of the colonies were the original American alternative media. These newspapers were able to speak against propaganda pushed by the British authority. Today we commonly use the words like liberty and freedom to describe our lives and our nation, without considering the cost of those words. It is easy to discuss these things when the majority of people in our nation embrace the language. Today, as you celebrate this Independence Day, whether it be with a family barbecue or a fireworks display, consider for a moment that at one time the idea of independence was not accepted by the majority of people in the colonies until a faithful few, like the Loyal Nine, stepped out and did the work of a patriot, speaking out against tyranny even when the majority would not do so. Perhaps it was the work of the Loyal Nine and the Sons of Liberty that inspired another patriot, Samuel Adams, to write, "It does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority keeping on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men." Happy Independence Day. And that was from benswan.com. And then I had another one here out of benswan.com. Let me cue it up. And this one is Ron Paul on Independence Day. Remember the spirit of rebellion against tyranny. So let me get this queued up. Okay, here we go.
Hello, this is Ron Paul with your weekly update for Monday, June 30th. This week, Americans will enjoy Independence Day with family cookouts and fireworks. Flags will be displayed in abundance. Sadly, however, what should be a celebration of the courage of those who risk so much to oppose tyranny will instead be turned into a celebration of government, not liberty. The mainstream media and opportunistic politicians have turned Independence Day into the opposite of what was intended. The idea of opposing, by force if necessary, a tyrannical government has been turned into a celebration of tyrannical government itself. The evidence is all around us. How would the signers of the Declaration of Independence have viewed, for example, the Obama administration drone memo finally released last week, which claims to justify the president's killing of American citizens without charge, judge, jury, or oversight? Is this not a tyranny similar to that which our founders opposed? And was such power concentrated in one branch of government not what inspired a rebellion against the English king in the first place? The drone memo, released after an ACLU Freedom of Information request, purports to establish the president alone as the arbiter of who is or is not a terrorist subject to execution by the U.S. government. There is no due process involved, just the determination of the president. Thus far, the only American citizens killed by the president are Anwar al-Awlaki and his teenage son. But the president has been established, according to the memo, that the president has the authority to kill Americans he believes are terrorists. Even the New York Times, which generally backs whatever U.S. administration is in power, is troubled by the White House's legal justification to claim the authority to kill Americans. A Times editorial last week concluded that, quote, the memo turns out to be a slapdash pastiche of legal theories, some based on obscure interpretation of British and Israeli law that was clearly tailored to the desired result, close quote. I agree with the New York Times conclusion that, quote, this memo should never have taken so long to be released, and more documents must be made public. The public is still in the dark on too many vital questions, close quote. Coincidentally, in addition to the drone memo released last week, a broader study of the U.S. use of drones was also released by the Stimson Center. The study, co-chaired by General John Abissad, former U.S. Central Command commander, concluded that contrary to claims that drones help prevent wider conflict by targeting specific individuals, the use of drones, quote, may create a slippery slope leading to continual or wider wars, close quote. In fact, the study concluded the use of drones overseas is likely counterproductive. Civilian casualties, even if relatively few, can anger whole communities, increase anti-American U.S. sentiment, and become a potent recruiting tool for terrorist organizations, the study found. 7 years ago, I wrote in an Independence Day column that, quote, only the safeguards and limitations that are enshrined in a constitutionally limited republic can prohibit a nation from lurching toward empire. I hope every person who reads or hears this will take the time to go back and read the Declaration of Independence. Only by recapturing the spirit of independence can we ensure our government never resembles the one from which the American states declared their separation, close quote. On Independence Day, we should remember the spirit of rebellion against tyranny that inspired our founding fathers to set out our experiment in liberty. We should ourselves celebrate and continue that struggle if we are to keep our republic. Thanks for calling this update. A new update is placed on this number, 888-322-1414, every Sunday. The written text can be found on my Ron Paul Institute website at www.ronpaulinstitute.org and on my Facebook page. Thanks for calling.
And again, that was from BenSwan.com, and that was Ron Paul Straight Talk. We have a lot of issues with our foreign policy, and again, you know, we can't be pro-war. Oh, we got to stop those bad people over there, and then go, you know, well, you know, we need less government here. Well, so you impose the government you don't want imposed on yourself on others. Kind of counterproductive and hypocritical. Definitely, if you want to say you're just spread freedom, no, it just doesn't work that way. Let me see if I can find this one. I really want to play it. It was from Josie Wells. Let me see if I can find it here. Gotta try to remember how she spelled the name too. Just give me a second here. Okay, I think I might have found it here. And this was one that she had posted, I believe, in March. Yes, March. It was titled "The Revolution Continues," and I think this is a relevant video for the 4th of July to have people listen to. And here in the description says, "We cannot improve on history by blindly revering an individual document or event. We can learn a lot from the founders, but both from what they got right and from what they got wrong, and we can do better than they did." And I think this is important. So, you know, it's something to look at, and here it goes.
People like to have heroes, inspiring characters we can look up to. But in the real world, no one is perfect, not even the most revered and respected historical figures. And it does no service to truth or justice to ignore the errors, moral and intellectual, of the supposed heroes of the past. We can learn from history and improve upon it only if we dare to see and embrace what others got right, while also seeing and rejecting what they got wrong. Americans may not like hearing it, but the Founding Fathers got some things wrong. They also got a lot right. But we shouldn't be so desperate to have someone to believe in that we ignored the contradictions and the hypocrisy in some of the things the founders did and said.
As an obvious example, with all their talk about unalienable rights and all men being created equal, the founders created a legal system which not only tolerated but enforced the most egregious violation of those principles imaginable: slavery. In early drafts of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, though a slave owner himself, condemned the institution of slavery, referring to it as a, quote, cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty. But some delegates of the Continental Congress refused to sign the Declaration until those words were removed. So fundamental principles were compromised, and profound injustice was allowed to continue for the sake of political expedience. This does not mean we should dismiss everything the founders said and did, but it does demonstrate that in order to learn from history, instead of unconditionally revering any document or any individual, thinking people need to separate out the wisdom from the mistakes. Thomas Jefferson himself lamented the fact that some people, quote, look at constitutions with sanctimonious reverence and deem them like the Ark of the Covenant, too sacred to be touched, and warned that people should not, quote, ascribe to the men of the preceding age a wisdom more than human, and suppose what they did to be beyond amendment. It's no secret that power corrupts, and history is full of examples of the oppressed becoming the new oppressors. George Washington was the military leader of the American Revolution, which was in large part a tax revolt. Several years later, as the first U.S. president, he personally led the military show of force, which put down a new tax revolt, known as the Whiskey Rebellion. Before the Revolution, John Adams was a vocal critic of British rule, saying, quote, the jaws of power are always open to devour, and her arm is always stretched out, if possible, to destroy the freedom of thinking, speaking, and writing. Then, when he became the second U.S. president, Adams signed into law the Aliens and Sedition Act, essentially making it a crime to criticize government. It is easy for the powerless to complain about injustice, but just as easy for freedom fighters to become tyrants once the power is in their hands. The Declaration of Independence was essentially a condemnation of authoritarian power and an argument for individual liberty and unalienable rights. In contrast, the Constitution was a list of new powers to be given to the new ruling class. Where the Declaration explains that all men are created equal, the Constitution claims to grant to certain people the power to tax and to regulate. Where the Declaration states that the people have the duty to throw off any government which becomes a violator of individual rights, the Constitution claims to grant to Congress the right to forcibly crush any attempts at insurrection. In short, the message of the Declaration of Independence was to empower the individual, but the purpose of the Constitution was to empower the new central government. At the time, both proponents and critics of the proposed Constitution acknowledged that its main purpose was to energize, strengthen, and expand the power of the national government, as compared to what had existed under the Articles of Confederation.
Many Americans think of the Founding Fathers as a group of men who all believed and advocated the same thing, and think of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution as being inseparable documents, written by the same people and based on the same principles. In reality, many of the names most strongly associated with the American Revolution were not supporters of the new Constitution, and rather than seeing it as the natural continuation of the principles expressed in the Declaration of Independence, saw it as a betrayal and the first step toward tyranny. Patrick Henry, whose "Give me liberty or give me death" speech is perhaps the most famous rallying cry for American independence, zealously rallied against the Constitution, predicting that it would destroy state sovereignty and result in serious violations of individual rights and the destruction of liberty. Mr. Henry even refused to attend the Constitutional Convention, saying, "I smell a rat." Likewise, Thomas Paine, whose pamphlet Common Sense is widely regarded as the primary inspiration for the American Revolution, was also a vehement critic and opponent of the new Constitution. The victors write the history books, but looking back at the debates between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, it's clear that the supporters of the Constitution were just wrong in their predictions and assurances, and those warning that the Constitution would lead to abuse and tyranny were right. Consider a few of the main points of contention between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Anti-Federalists predicted that giving the new federal government the power to tax would result in abuse and oppression, while the Federalists insisted that federal tax collectors, if they existed at all, would be few and far between, mainly on the coast, enforcing import and export taxes, would rarely, if ever, resort to using internal taxes, and would be nowhere near the number of tax collectors that would exist at the state level. On all these points, the Federalists were dead wrong. In contrast, the predictions of Patrick Henry regarding what the taxing clause would lead to were a lot closer to the truth.
The officers of Congress may come upon you now, fortified with all the terrors of paramount federal authority. Excisemen may come in multitudes, for the limitation of their numbers no man knows. Patrick Henry.
The current federal tax system, which extorts around $3 trillion a year from well over 100 million Americans by way of the notoriously abusive and corrupt IRS, is far more burdensome and intrusive than anything the King of England ever inflicted on the American colonies. And the alleged authority for all of it comes from the taxing clause of the U.S. Constitution.
In this scheme of energetic government, the people will find two sets of tax gatherers, the state and the federal sheriffs. The federal sheriff may commit what oppression, make what distresses he pleases, and ruin you with impunity. For how are you to tie his hands? Patrick Henry.
Anti-Federalists also warned about the military powers which the Constitution would give to the new federal government, including giving it control of the militia. Again, the Federalists insisted that there was no threat of imperial warmongering and that the U.S. military would never become more powerful than the people or the state militias. Again, the predictions of Patrick Henry were a lot closer to the mark.
If your American chief be a man of ambition and abilities, how easy is it for him to render himself absolute? The army is in his hands, and if he be a man of address, it will be attached to him, and it will be the subject of long meditation with him to seize the first auspicious moment to accomplish his design. Patrick Henry.
Regarding the question of whether the U.S. military has been used purely defensively or as a tool of imperial conquest, Keep in mind that in the history of the country, there has only been one foreign invasion of U.S. soil, during the War of 1812. The 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor could debatably be included as a second example, although that was a strike on a military target rather than a true invasion, and occurred back before Hawaii was a state. Nonetheless, more often than not, for more than 2 centuries since the Constitution was ratified, the U.S. military has been engaged in numerous violent conflicts around the world, usually at the bidding of the President without a declaration of war from Congress, exactly what Patrick Henry warned about. The Federalists also insisted that a Bill of Rights was not necessary and shouldn't be included in the Constitution. Eventually it was included, only because of the states that refused to ratify the Constitution without a Bill of Rights. Today, the U.S. government routinely violates nearly all of the principles expressed in the Bill of Rights anyway. Interestingly, the Commerce Clause of the Constitution, which has served as the legal excuse for the vast majority of Congress's regulatory and legislative intrusions into the lives of the American people, was hardly even mentioned in the debates between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists.
The regulation of commerce, it is true, is a new power, but that seems to be an addition which few oppose, and from which no apprehensions are entertained. James Madison.
In short, the Federalists predicted that the new federal government created by the Constitution would be far smaller, far less expensive, and far less powerful than the state governments, and would pose no real threat to the freedom of the American people.
The number of individuals employed under the Constitution of the United States will be much smaller than the number employed under the particular states. James Madison.
In contrast, the Anti-Federalists predicted that the supposed checks and balances and the ability of the people to vote every few years would not stop the new government from becoming powerful, corrupt, expensive, and abusive.
I might say that the expense will be multiplied tenfold. I might tell you of a numerous standing army, a great powerful navy, a long and rapacious train of officers and dependents, independent of the President, senators, and representatives, whose compensations are without limitation.
Patrick Henry warned that by giving Congress the control of the purse, via the power to tax, and control of the sword, via the military, the Constitution would lead to a tyranny worse than existed under a king. In spite of the assurances and predictions of the Federalists, the U.S. Constitution created what would become the most powerful authoritarian empire the world has ever known, with the biggest war machine and the largest and most intrusive extortion racket in history. By any objective measure, the American people were oppressed far less by a king than they are now by the representative republic created by the Constitution.
The sad truth is that the list of abuses committed by King George, as enumerated in the Declaration of Independence signed here in 1776, pales in comparison to the injustices being inflicted on the American people today by their own constitutional republic. Contrary to the assurances of the Federalists, every power which the Constitution granted to the federal government, under the promise that such powers would be used sparingly and only to serve the people, have been used to subjugate the people, while enriching and empowering the ruling elite. And with the possible exception of the Third Amendment, every article in the Bill of Rights is violated every day in every state of the Union by federal agents. By any objective measure, the United States Constitution utterly failed to keep government limited, failed to preserve individual rights, and is still used as the justification for all of the federal taxation, regulation, warmongering, criminalization, surveillance, and other governmental controls and intrusions being inflicted upon the American people and on people of many other countries around the world.
So if you ask me whether I support the document which ended up creating the most powerful authoritarian empire in the history of the world, no, I don't. To paraphrase Lysander Spooner, the Constitution was either intended to create the government we have now, or it failed to prevent the government we have now. Either way, it was a mistake. If you ask whether I want to try the same thing again while hoping for a drastically different outcome, no, I don't. If you ask me whether I believe that a piece of parchment can defend liberty, no, I don't. If you ask me whether I think any government has ever or will ever truly represent and serve the people it taxes and controls, no, I don't. If you ask me whether I think elections or constitutions or any political process of any kind can ever create real peace, justice, and freedom, no, I don't. Now, if you ask me whether I think we have anything to learn from the Founding Fathers, yes, I most certainly do. We can learn from their successes and their failures, from their virtues and wisdom and from their vices and mistakes. The founders were right when they explained that all men are created equal and have inherent rights that do not come from government and that outrank anything man-made legislation can ever do. They were right when they spoke about natural law and the unalienable right that every individual has, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They were right when they advocated disobeying and resisting the arbitrary and unjust commands of a supposed authority. They were right when they said that the people have a duty to cast off any government that becomes a violator of individual rights. They were right to say that human organizations should be based upon consent, but they were wrong in thinking that government could be a part of it. They were wrong in their assumption that political power could ever be good or legitimate or could ever make society what it should be. Basically, they were right about every power that they said government should not have, and wrong about every power they said government should have. If there's anything to be learned from the American experiment, it's that limited government is a myth, that political authority cannot be kept in check by any document, any political process, any election, or any supposed system of checks and balances. If the American experiment proved anything, it's that once the seed of authoritarian power has been planted, however small and limited it may seem at first, it will find a way to grow, and it will become a threat to peace, justice, and freedom. But the revolution is not over. In the end, the revolutions which happen with guns and bombs are not what matter. What matters, what has the ability to improve things, is the revolution of the mind. We can't fix the world by changing authoritarian regimes, only by changing the paradigms inside our own heads. As long as some men claim the right to rule, and others claim the right to be free, the revolution will continue. Final victory will come only when humanity as a whole gives up its faith in authoritarianism and statism, and embraces instead the principles of true equality, of non-aggression, of self-ownership, of voluntarism, when people are truly ready to be free.
Again, that was Josie Outlaw. Josie Outlaw on YouTube. The revolution continues. And, you know, it's one of the things you have to look in the mirror. You have to become that change. You can't expect it to happen unless you're willing to do it in your own life. And again, that's checking your own hypocrisy when it happens. It's going to happen. But you have to be willing to question yourself. And I talk about that a lot. Question what you believe and say, does what I say I believe represent who I am? And, you know, I joke around with friends and stuff, you know, but in the end, they all know who I am and, you know, what I truly believe. And, you know, we can joke around about things, but in the end, I'm always one of those people that helps others out and doesn't always pay off for me, but that's not what it's about. It's one of those things I want to have that character. Therefore, and I want to see others have that type of character. Therefore, I have to be a example. I have to be that one that will, you know, help people out when they need it and not expect anything in return. A lot of people, even when they help someone, I'll help you for this, and that's not usually who I am. A lot of times, you know, I just, out of goodwill, you know, I just do things, and people aren't expecting it. They're like, oh, you know, you don't have to do that, you know. They're waiting for me to ask for something. And I'm like, you don't have to give me anything. You know, I went and bought groceries, you know, hundreds of dollars worth of groceries for people that, you know, they were falling on hard times and I knew they needed it. So that doesn't help me out, definitely financially, but, you know, they're on harder times, and it's something that I was willing to do. And there are times that I will ask for something in return, and it's usually, I need you to do this for yourself. You know, I need you to take that leap and do something out of the ordinary, out of your little comfort zone to better yourself. And usually, you know, they're willing to do that, and it most of the time it turns out for the best. Some give up on it pretty quick, some stick to it, and for a couple $100 worth of groceries to ask someone to do that, it's not too bad of a deal. And I've done that a couple times, and other things I've helped people out with, and it's being that example, and, you know, saying you don't have to be rich. You have to be able to have people you can trust and lean on hard times. And, you know, because of that, when I've fallen on hard times, people weren't afraid to, you know, stop over, you know, you need anything, you know, do okay. It's one of those things that it creates that community. You don't need government to have that. It's a mutual respect. And that mutual respect also applies when it comes to defense, protecting yourself and your community. You have those people around you that are willing to do that. And, you know, the evolution, like she said, it has to start in the minds of men. And I think we'll get there. Now, I usually don't call out organizations or groups, but the Free State Project, Porkfest, security looking for Cantwell. I've seen all kinds of articles. Apparently, there were people with putting up wanted posters and had masks on of Cantwell, and just kind of riling up. And, well, the organizers of the Free State Project, the people behind the actual organization / website, they had security at gates checking cars. They were checking campsites. They were looking for Cantwell. Now, does that sound like a free state? I think the Free State organization compared to the Free Staters in New Hampshire are completely at odds with ideology. I see the Free State Project organization becoming almost party-like. They are not really representing what most people would think freedom to be. And it was pretty interesting. Adam Kokesh, he was able to interview Cantwell about this and what took place. And I'm going to play that because this is the opposite of freedom. I think what the Free State Project is doing, I understand it's their event and all that, but they were even ripping down wanted posters from campsites that people paid to rent. they paid for that lot, and they still came in and ripped down posters and took masks. And let me go ahead and cue this up.
Cantwell.
Good to be with you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Holy crap. Are you at your new home studio set up in...
And there's going to be maybe a little language, so beware.
And yes, I have moved back to New Hampshire. I am in Keene. I am directly across the street from the Keene Activist Center, from which I am banned, so it's even more funny. And I'm having a blast.
I love it, man. I love it. And it's really great to have a chance to catch up with you. And I don't know if you want to give us a chance to tell us what you're working on there now, or if some of that's covert, but it's great to see you happy, and it's great to see you set up in a... I mean, you have a better soundboard than I do. You're going to be... I can't wait to see what ChristopherCantwell.com becomes as a media force now that you are able to bring to bear what you are to this.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I've got this studio's set up, pretty nicely, and going to be working on that some more, of course. But the place where I was at before was not really conducive to creating good quality videos. But I can set up my green screen in this place. I've got my studio, as you can see here, and set up all of my equipment, and I'm very happy. So I'm going to be, as you know, I've been writing a lot. I'm going to continue writing, but now I'm going to start producing more YouTube videos, and of course, there's all sorts of activism and stuff to film here, so that'll be a part of it. Certainly, there's a lot on the horizon. And by the way, with all my haters here, I get so much free promotion. It's just beautiful.
Well, yeah, you're like the movement's best troll, I suppose, in a lot of ways. But I want to get a report from PorkFest from you, and about what's the attitude in Keene around this. But I do want to jump to the heart of a much more important matter with you. Is you may not be surprised to hear, but the last time we spoke was in the wake of the cop killings in Nevada, and we were debating the use of force. And you know that all I care about now is getting people to read my book, having laid it all out. And when you first read it, and you got invited to read it before it was pre-released, and I was honored to hear you actually get into it and take it in. And I'm not surprised. And I want to say, I'm really glad to hear that you're going to keep writing blog posts. You don't hear that about a lot of people. They're a lot like for me, I'm not a blog writer anymore. I used to be. I used to do that, and I was okay at it. You're really fucking good at it. What you're able to do with that medium, putting together a digestible piece of thought is really incredible. And I think that's your greatest strength as a media producer, as good as you are speaking as well. And I thought your stand-up was the best. Really, I hope you get back into pushing the comedy, because that was incredible.
Well, thank you. The writing was really surprising to me how well it went over. I didn't really think of myself as a writer. I started the website just as sort of like to have an outlet of my own, because as you know, I'm constantly running into conflicts in different places, getting banned from different social media platforms and organizations and whatnot, and I needed my own space. And what I realized was just, I would write whenever I made a video. But obviously, you write something and then you try to read it off of a screen, and there's so many different things that go into that. And if I can just publish the writing, then it seems to be very well received, and there's search engine stuff to that as well.
The medium captures the way you think well, and having read a number of your posts, I've seen that you are very open-minded, and it's great to be talking to someone who's not a dogmatic libertarian, but someone who is a philosopher for whom one of their conclusions is libertarianism. And that's really cool. So, having read a number of your blog posts, I have seen not just how you are actually open-minded, how you are actually thinking through these things, how you are actually applying a wonderful analysis, but that you're going through a broader development yourself. And the reason that you're the character that you are in the movement is because you're the guy with the cop killing strategy, right?
Well, I'd like to think that it's more than that, but yeah, that's a big part of it. That's probably something that's attracted more attention to me than a lot of other things. Yeah,
it fits with the rest of your persona as, you know, anarchist, atheist, asshole, and the, you know, stand-up comic who does plenty of insult comedy. But you've come a ways in your thinking as well, and we joked about it, but do you think that this is going to be the video we release called Christopher Cantwell Renounces Violence? Finally? Tactically?
This video right now?
Yeah.
No, I don't think that this is going to be that video. I'm really happy to, you know, I came on planning to talk about something else, and that's fine. We can talk about whatever you want. But, you know, I was saying that if you could have convinced me at any time, then whatever video that was recorded on, you can label it that. Because I'm, as you mentioned, I mean, I'm really open to other strategies. I don't like, you know, having these beliefs. I'd really rather believe something else, but I'm sort of bound to what I perceive to be the truth.
Okay, well, hold on a second. One of your arguments was the strategic significance, right, or of getting to a voting consensus to localize government. And someone actually sent me an email to correct me on my math, because I was telling you that it was 61.8% of the population that voted in 2012 for Obama's reelection, and that hypothetically that means that it's really about, if you get 30% of the population to vote, that, and that, by the way, that's 61.8%, not of the population. Of the population, it's a lot less. This is of the voting population. Of the actual population, because you take out minors, felons, immigrants, people who are legally prevented from voting, it's about half of that again. So, but 61.8% of the voters, about 30% of the voters, you actually need only 20% if you're going to basically beat a three-way split, and Republicans and Democrats are still there, and they're going to be when this comes up.
Yeah, but you're still talking about like upwards of 60 million people getting on board with your ideas. If I remember the exact number of voters right, I mean, I think it was something like 61 million people voted for Barack Obama.
Sure.
Now, if I'm not opposed to you getting 61 million people to vote for you, Adam, I really hope, I wish you all the best in doing that. I just think it's terribly unlikely.
It's to endorse localization.
Whatever it is, I mean, if you're talking about on a national election scale, you're talking about 60-plus million people for the presidency, then not to mention 435 seats in the House and 100 seats in the Senate. I mean, it's just such a huge project, and I wish you all the best in accomplishing it. I just think it's terribly unlikely. You know, if you're talking about 5% of the population in a place like New Hampshire, I mean, that's like 66,000 people, which is still a rather large demographic that you're trying to appeal to, and it seems like an almost impossible goal, given that the Free State Project has been working to get 20,000 peaceful libertarians to move here for 13 years.
All right, you still think you're going to convince more people to kill cops first?
Well, either that or we're going to fail. I mean, the possibility exists either way.
I don't wish you good luck with that.
You know, I hope that somebody else has a lot better success with a different strategy. I'll say that, you know.
All right, what did you want to talk about tonight before we get to Porkfest?
Well, that's what I was told I was coming on to talk about. Great. I'll talk about anything, you know. Well, I'm happy. I'm just enjoying your company.
The word we got from Porkfest was that you were there running around, and then there were lots of people running around with Christopher Cantwell masks. How did that happen?
So I was like sitting around my house in my underwear watching Netflix. And
which is 90% of your life,
sending
right?
me text messages asking me if I was at Porkfest, and I was like, "No, I'm like 2.5 hours away." You know, at this point, I don't want to go to Porkfest any more than I want to go to Antonio fucking Bueller's house, right? You know, if this is the way these people want to behave, that they're freaking out. They threatened to call the police on me, dude. You know, they set up a goddamn checkpoint at the entrance. They were checking people's cars to see if they were smuggling Christopher Cantwell's in. This is the world I live in now, right?
Man,
so this is the level of hysteria that's going on in New Hampshire right now. And what happened was, when people started telling me this, I said, "Well, keep that rumor going. You know, keep them thinking that I'm there. That's hysterical." And Bill Domenico, he has the green beam, the laser beam that he was shining on the roof of the pavilion. He's advertising my website. I sent up, some 100 or so different flyers that people started posting on Trees Wanted posters with my cartoon character. And they were posting them around, and I sent up like 20 printouts of my cartoon character's face and rubber bands that people were putting on their faces and wearing around PorkFest.
So you're banned, but they're having a good laugh about it.
Well, I don't think the Free State Project is having a laugh about it at all. They were very upset about it. I've actually heard they ripped down posters from private campsites, that they actually said, you're not allowed to have this on your campsite that you've rented from Rogers Campground, and took flyers from people. They were extraordinarily unhappy about it.
Wait, what were the flyers?
That makes me happy.
What were the flyers?
I had wanted posters printed up with my cartoon character that said, "Wanted by PorkFest Security for blogging."
But even then, that's like agreeing with the spirit of it. It's not even saying anything in contradiction to it. That's so funny. That's like, you would think that might actually, like, if they felt strongly enough to actually ban you, you wouldn't be surprised if they actually put up such, maybe not as ridiculous, but similar flyers to just say, Christopher Cantwell is not welcome here. He looks like this.
They at least passed his picture around amongst each other. Same thing.
The thing is, and what the biggest joke to me about it is like, I think their caller's complaint has been that I'm using this to promote myself. Well, if you want to stop promoting me, you probably stop saying my fucking name everywhere. If they would shut the fuck up about me, this might like blow over, but they won't. So this is what happens, and it's a good economics lesson if you think about it. If the Free State Project can't centrally plan the economy of Rogers fucking Campground, then you don't think that the state of New Hampshire or the United States is going to have much luck in centrally planning other things. Gigi Bowman was a big part of it. She had like a bake stand at her campsite. She used the promotion of my website in order to bring people to her campsite where she could sell baked goods, and other people, took part in this as well. And I Skyped in live to her, and this was like a whole nother thing because she didn't say that I was Skyping in. She just said that I would be appearing live. Right? So all of these people are freaking out, thinking that I'm going to be at PorkFest, and that there's going to be some big conflict with police because I open carry when I'm here. You call the police on me to remove me from a place, it could get hairy, right? So this was this big contention, but of course if Rogers Campground is my understanding that the Free State Project got Rogers Campground on board with the ban. When they tell me that it's their property and I'm not welcome there, then I'm an anarchist, not a party crasher.
Yeah, and hypothetically, this is all legitimate non-aggression principle, property rights, stuff like that. It's just there's an incredible hive mind that is developed around within the Free State Project, but even more so specifically around PorkFest. And it's really kind of an open source event in a lot of ways. And there is this giant collaborative process of lots of speakers and presenters and screeners and vendors and things like that, and cooks and whatnot, who are coming to make PorkFest what it is. And there is this brilliant and beautiful hive mind, but I guess a consequence of that is that sometimes it acts like a petulant child.
Well, the thing you have to understand about the Free State Project, I'd like for people to sort of separate in their minds the Free State Project, Inc., the corporation, right, from the Free State Movement, right? Because if you come to New Hampshire, as I have, the Free State Project, Inc. has absolutely shit to do with your life. They're not involved in anything that we do. It's just basically like a half a dozen people who take themselves way too seriously and meet like 4 times a year and get a whole bunch of money from unnamed donors for doing so. Right?
All right, Chris. So, last thought, if you would, please.
Come to New Hampshire, join me here. It's a blast, and fuck what these other people are doing, because if they don't like it, that's their problem. They don't have to be happy. We're having fun. Sir.
Okay, and like he said, they're only a organization there. They're not, controlling everything, and it's important that the Free Staters, really truly recognize individual liberty, and I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but a lot of what I've seen and the people that I know that are up there are really they're more libertarian than the Free State Project as an organization. I really don't think that free state will really dominate the area. I think the idea, the original, idea spawned something that that the organization trying to become more legit will be out of line with the people that are moving there. I think the idea is beyond what the organizers are looking for. And let me see here. I had something here. I just want to say, one thing about this immigration thing. There's so many dangers that are being caused by this this immigration influx that a lot of people are not addressing. Well, I don't want to say a lot of people, but the establishment is definitely not addressing, because otherwise this would stop. But I think it's preparing for something big, and I don't know what. And I'm not even going to attempt to try to come to some forecast of the future, but we probably want to watch this. You go to benswan.com, you have an article here, Ron Paul, with the influx of immigration children, U.S. hospitals are overwhelmed. Congressman denied access to military facility housing 1,200 immigrant children, told to make an appointment. Then they have increase in airport security ordered for all U.S. inbound flights. Really? Does that not seem a little odd? Let's let people cross the border in droves, but we need to increase airport security for inbound flights. Why? Why would that make a difference? They'll go through Mexico. That's why I think it's all a little funny, things just don't seem to be adding up. And I have one more that I want to cover. And this is about Cybersecurity Sharing Act of 2014 and supporters. Supporters under threat from anonymous splinter group. It says the act here and supporters of the bill are the newest targets of a group of hackers affiliated with the hacktivist collective Anonymous. The group call themselves the Anon Message, TAM, and have recently gained notoriety online after declaring war on the newly formed the Islamic State and supporters of ISIL in the form of a YouTube video. CISA is being touted by the Anonymous sect as the next in a long line of internet-based bills, including SOPA, CISPA, and PIPA, all of which failed to pass. TAM have also made the claim that new bill infringes on Fourth Amendment rights of all citizens. Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Dianne Feinstein, Senate's Intelligence Committee Vice Chairman Saxby Chambliss introduced a draft of the bill on June 17th. Bill incentivizes the sharing of cybersecurity threat information between the private sector and the government, with the senators, according to RT. to play this. Well, let me see how long it is first. I'm not going to play anything long. We know where this all leads, but I'm not for or against Anonymous. I think they're fighting in a different way that I'm not. But, you know, we need to find ways to counteract, and I think hackers are definitely going to be a way to keep us free. The good ones. I guess this isn't too long, I'll play it.
To the citizens of the United States of America, we are anonymous. It has come to our attention that Congress is planning to pass a bill that will jeopardize privacy and personal security across all forms of media. We would like to inform you that despite our direct and crippling attacks on former cybersecurity bills like SOPA, PIPA, and CISPA, there is yet a new threat. The Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act of 2014 has the power to allow governing authorities to search through and extract any form of data, public or private, from the Internet, regardless of any privacy settings. Not only is this a direct attack against the Fourth Amendment of the Bill of Rights, but it is also an attack against our collective. CISA and those who have crafted and supported this bill have become sworn enemies of Anonymous. You will have to stand with us once again. Companies like Google will not stand with us as they have stood against SIPA as the bill conforms to them. Our legion's wrath will fall on each senator, representative, corporation, and official who voices support for this bill. This is a direct message to the United States government. Every action you perform, every word you say, we will know. If you value the sanctity of your loved ones as well as your own, it will be best for you to back down and drop this bill where it belongs, out of our Congress. If not, we will be forced to show you our legion's extent. We will march through the streets and we will make sure our voices keep you awake. Operation Defense re-engaged. We are anonymous. We are legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. To the United States government, you should have expected us.
Now, doesn't the whole computer voice kind of sound make the whole, you know, all the clips sound a little bit spooky? Definitely with that background music. They need like a sweet old lady talking, or something that doesn't have any type of scary sound to it. I don't know. You know, we're going to see where this goes, but I really think the internet as we know it, in the form it is, it's going to change, and alternatives are going to pop up. And, you know, we need it. We need alternatives to a lot of things. We have government attacking people at all kinds of angles. You hear about the guy that got arrested, is spending some jail time for collecting rainwater, out of the freethoughtproject.com. One titled "Man Faces Jail Time for Installing Wind Turbine on Owned Property." It says here, a Minnesota man is risking jail time by refusing to remove a wind turbine from his property. A local government and a few nosy neighbors have been disputing the construction of this turbine for over 4 years since it was built in 2010. Jay Nygaard actually owns a company called Go Green Energy, which sells wind turbines in other areas of Minnesota. But he isn't able to do so in Orano, where he lives, but because of permit and licensing laws. They are the same laws that are preventing Nygaard from building on his own property. In recent years, there has been at least 8 lawsuits back and forth between Nygaard, the local government, and his neighbors. The neighbors claim that his windmills are an eyesore and nuisance, but in reality, it isn't actually any of their business. Nygaard has the right to do whatever he wants on his own property, but unfortunately in a democracy such as the United States, the property rights of an individual can be overridden according to the whims of politicians and the demands of uninvolved third parties. Earlier last month, a district judge representing the local government demanded that Nygaard and his wife remove the turbine. The judge threatened to throw the man in jail if he left the turbine on his property, but Nygaard is standing his ground and refusing to give in. And you can check that out at the Free Thought Project. Man faces jail time for installing wind turbine on own property. And, you know, a lot of people are like, I'm done with politics. But again, you know, as long as the structure is there and they have that monopoly on force and they're able to enact that monopoly on force, it's really urgent that, you know, liberty lovers organize and I think most important position is county sheriff, and go from there and make sure that they don't have the authoritarians don't have a majority control over your local government, and definitely that sheriff, county sheriff. I think that's extremely important, and if you want to sustain as much liberty as you can, definitely the direction the country's headed, you really need to focus on that local level. And your county is where you really want to truly focus, and the sheriff. Your sheriff has the ability to stop so much crime against the people if you have the right person there. I want to apologize for last Wednesday because I had those teeth removed. I had a reed-rod going from my end and kind of fell asleep at the helm there. So apologize to the other hosts and listeners out there. That was definitely my fault. But we do have coming up next Boiler Room with Jim Funky here on UCY.TV. And always go to the Amazon store. If you go to UCY.TV right there, a little Amazon link, and shop the UCY store. Some great gear, and it'll help support the network. A lot of great things being done here, a lot of great hosts, and just do what you can to support your alternative media, your real media, and hopefully we can really grow liberty in the minds of men and women out there. Take care and have a great weekend. Have a great 4th of July.